some problems here. And there was a provision in our state constitution that said that they would not provide money for the building of the Capitol building for 3 years. And you might ask, well, why would they do that? Because the people that wrote our state constitution knew there would be rivals to be the state capitals. And when we became a state, that's exactly what happened. Now, who are these rivals? Well, one you would think about would be Virginia City, because they had the most people and they had the wealth. Also, Silver City. And also American Flats, which is near there. And also, this is kind of funny, Austin, little town of Austin. And the reason is because it was in the center part of our state. And it was like easy access. Well, with all these people contending for being the state capital, the people that were responsible for allocating money, they were reluctant. And they wouldn't do anything. Let it play out, they said. Well, it goes on for years and years, until finally we had an advocate here in Carson City, William Stewart. And he said, he was an attorney, and he's also a bit of a political horse trader. And he said, I know what I can do. I'm going to go to each of these individual legislators, and I'm going to say, now look, if you vote to accept Carson City as the capital, Carson City and its friends will vote to allow you to select your own county seat. That worked. And
that's why we had 13 counties.
That's how we got this Capitol building built. So the first thing they did, they could allocate money. They allocated $100,000, which was a huge amount of money in 1875. And once they did that, they had to get an architect. We found a man from San Francisco, Joseph Gosling. And he said, I'll do it. And these are all the calculations and all the drawings and things like that. And now they have the plans. So they opened it up to bid. The winning bid was submitted by a local company, Peter Kavanaugh and Son. And they said, we could do it for $84,000. Well, that was a lot of money, yeah. But it was under the $100,000. Sounded like a bargain to me. And so they got the contract. Unfortunately, they had a little thing called cost overruns. Yes, they had in those days too. And by the time this was done, it cost $170,000. It's kind of reassuring to know that some things just don't change. A little bit about the building itself. As you came here, I'm sure you saw this beautiful marble. This is Alaskan gray marble. It was brought here in 1917. They did the wainscoting and also the floor. Also in 1917, we had a wonderful mural made by a Reno artist, A.D. Wiggins. And he tried to incorporate some of the major industries in Nevada at that time. So, of course, the big one was mining. So we have mining names of minerals, there are 21 of them, and also mining implements. And then we had, there's a picture of a bull, and there's one of a ram that represents ranching. And then we have a sheath of wheat, and that represents agriculture. The very top is a line of pine cones. That represents northern Nevada. And this one I think is rather interesting. Southern Nevada is represented by grapes and grape leaves. I don't know how we got that. We had to put it together.
Maybe they like to drink, yeah.
You'll notice also we have these wonderful portraits, and you'll see these all through the Capitol building. These are former governors of the state of Nevada. Now, we have a nice tradition here that when a governor leaves office, we have that portrait made, an oil portrait made of that person. And we always put it in this position. And it's our most recent former governor is now Steve Sisolak. And his placement is rather interesting because that is the exit door of the governor's state. And this one is one of them that represents Nevada. This is Sarah Winnemucca. And I have to tell you, she was a true Indian princess. Her father was Chief Winnemucca, and we have the town Winnemucca named after him. And then we have Chief Truckee and the Truckee River that goes through Reno. So now, father and grandfather didn't always agree. But the one thing they did want is they wanted Sarah and her sister to have an education. So they made arrangements for the two girls to stay at a home owned by Major Ormsby in Genoa. And there they were to learn reading and writing and things like that, and the culture. And she wanted to become a teacher. And she was pretty much self-taught. By the time she was 14 years old, she could speak 5 languages. The 3 major languages here in northern Nevada, Washoe, Shoshone, and Paiute. She could also speak Spanish and English. Her goal was to go to California, to go to a girls' school and to become a teacher. They would not allow it because she was an Indian.
Wow.
So she experienced discrimination at a very early age. But despite that, she did become a teacher. In fact, she was a teacher at a school that was operated on her brother's ranch. And in her later life, she became an advocate for the Native Americans. And she would go all over the country speaking to groups about the wrongs that were done to her people. She wrote a book, the first book ever written by a Native American woman. It's called Life Among Paiutes. And it talks about her early experiences here in Nevada. And she witnessed the people going to California for the gold rush. And she experienced a lot of the things that had happened. And anyway, this particular sculpture was done by a young 25-year-old sculptor. His name was Benjamin Victor, and he did a wonderful job. You know, most statues are kind of like, you know, very stiff. This one has some movement in it. You can see that she has one foot in the future, one in the past, one in one culture and one in the other culture. She's wearing her own type of what she used to actually wore, and her native wear. But also here, there's a pouch that has cupids. So again, it's the other culture. So it's a kind of blending. Anyway, it's beautifully done. And I think this is a wonderful representative of that. I want to show you some other governors as we go. Yes?
What's in her hand up there?
I'm sorry?
In her hand.
In her right hand, what is it?
That is a flower, and that is her name in Paiute.
Oh.
Okay, this way, please. How cool look like oak? You might ask yourself, well, why would they do that? Why didn't they just buy a regular oak? It was an art form, and they did a wonderful job. It does look like oak. This banister is made out of black walnut. It's original to the building, brought here in 1871. Okay, folks, please follow me upstairs. There used to be a large opening right here, and you could see right into the dome. This caused a couple of problems. First of all, we had an echo on the second floor. And another thing is we had bats that lived up there. And they swooped down, causing all sorts of havoc. To people that worked here, but also tourists.
Yeah.
And so in the 1960s, we had a project to make the dome stronger. And after they were finished, they enclosed it. Now, my friends, we no longer have any problems with bats. These are also portraits of former governors, but these are 19th century governors. And you'll notice a big difference in the way they appear. Most of them have beards or mustaches, which was the style in those days. I'm now going to show you my favorite portrait, and I think you'll enjoy it. He had a nice nickname, Old Broadhorns. And how he got that name, he had a ranch in the eastern part of our state, and he had Texas Longhorns. Ever seen Texas Longhorns? They're huge. But isn't that a beautiful portrait? Whenever I have children, I always ask them, who does that remind you of? And they always say, Santa Claus.
Santa Claus.
Someone was asking me who was our first governor.
Not Moses.
And here it is. This is Henry Blaisdell. And I gotta tell you, this guy was tall. Well, maybe not tall in our view. He was 6'5". But in 1864, when he took office, he was a giant. Because most men were about 5'5", 5'6". I mean, he just a tall everyone. Now, he and his wife did not believe in alcohol, so they didn't serve that for social occasions, but they did serve coffee and chocolate. And that gave rise to his nickname, the Coffee and Chocolate Governor.
Ask a question.
Ask a question?
Yes.
Where was he situated if he wasn't here in the
I think it was near the Elko area.
Elko?
Yeah.
Also, on that portrait back there,
Yeah.
not that I read almost all, but I did that one, and it says silver plate.
Okay, we'll
Okay.
come back to that. I'm glad you mentioned that, because
Okay.
there's something interesting. Only territorial governor. This is Henry Blaisdell, and he's the only person on this floor that does not sport a beard or a mustache. He was originally a commissioner of police in New York City. And we had an election of 1860, and Abraham Lincoln was elected president. And he was a loyal Republican. And I think he was rewarded for that, because in 1861, when it became a territory, James Buchanan made us a territory, but in the closing days of his administration. And then it fell to Abraham Lincoln to then provide a person to serve as the territorial governor. He chose him. And very able, very capable. And we do have a county named after him, Nye County, in the south center part of the state. He played a crucial role in us becoming a state. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we go into the Assembly chamber. He was a personal friend of Abraham Lincoln. In fact, he was given his own key to a side door of the White House so that he could come in whenever he wanted to kind of trade stories with old Abe.
Hopefully, what's just the stories.
Please take a seat. Okay.
I got a good picture of us. It's the youth of the future.
This was the legislative body because they used to be in this Capitol building. This was the lower chamber, the Nevada State Assembly. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we became a state. And they passed a law called the Enabling Act. And it was kind of like our how to become a state, the various steps you had to take. One of the steps was that the new state had to submit their state constitution to Washington for the approval of the president to make sure that there was no mention of slavery in their state constitution. Well, we had a big election in September of 1860 to approve the state constitution. And the people, well, actually only the men, because they were the only ones that could vote at that time, they voted to accept the state constitution. It then fell to our governor, the acting governor, or the territorial governor. And he said, this is really important, and I do not want to make a mistake. And so I'm going to make 2 certified copies of our state constitution. And I'm going to send one by sea, by way of San Francisco, and I'm going to send the other one across the country by stagecoach. And he was sure, I think he was positive, that one or both of those copies would get to Washington before the election. Guess what happened?
They didn't get there.
They never got there.
They never got there.
About 2 weeks before the election, our governor and I, got a very important message from the Secretary of State saying essentially, what happened? We cannot proceed with your state until we get that document. Well, what was he going to do? We did not have FedEx in those days. And he said, wait a minute. There's this new invention called the telegraph. Why don't we send our entire document by telegraph? It had never been done before. And that is exactly what they did. Now, how did we do it? There was no direct route from Carson City to Washington, D.C. Now, we were kind of fortunate. There were 2 men, Mr. Hodge and Mr. Ward, and they worked for the California Telegraph Company here in Carson City. And they said, we'll do it for you. Pretty good. So how did they do it? They started here in Carson City, and they made the first transmission to Salt Lake City. From Salt Lake City, they made the next transmission to Chicago. From Chicago to Philadelphia, Philadelphia, all the way to Washington, D.C. The process took about 2 days, which I know sounds like a long time, but in 1864, we're talking about lickety split time. Well, it gets to Washington, of course, they had to transcribe it into handwriting, which they did. They presented to Mr. Lincoln. He looked at it. Yep, looks pretty good to me. He signed off on October the 31st, 1864. And we celebrate that day even today. And we call it
Nevada.
You had a day.
Halloween.
And Halloween.
Let me tell you another story. And it has to do with that nice fence. As you came in, I'm sure you saw that kind of an iron fence. Well, in 1875, the ladies of Carson City complained. And they said, we don't like to walk along the Capitol grounds. And the reason had to do with animals. In those days, there was no barriers to keep cows and sheep and pigs and horses from coming in and out as they pleased. And being animals, they're going to leave their little pulling cars. You have to remember, in those days, these ladies had these very long dresses. Not very pleasant. So they had to do something. So they got all the contractors together, and they said, okay, how much is it going to cost a new state to put up a nice iron fence? And the winning bid was submitted by a person called H. Clapp. Who is this H. Clapp person? They claimed they didn't know. It turned out to be Hannah Clapp, a woman. She said, I could put up that sign for $5,500, and she did. And not only that, she made a profit of $1,000. She was quite a remarkable woman.
She was actually on budget.
Anyway, so she got the bid. Anyway, She was a remarkable woman, not only for contracting, but she also was an educator. Started the very first kindergarten here in Carson City, first academy here in Carson City. She also was a wonderful businesswoman. She had business all over this valley. And after she left Carson City, she went to Reno and became the head of the library at UNR, and also taught some of the classes there. So a very remarkable woman. And we will see a picture of her along the way in our trip. Tell you one more story, and it has to do with this. This was a painting called the Nevada Lincoln. And it used to be here. And there was a nice tradition in those days that when the legislature met, they would meet usually in the morning, and then usually by early afternoon they would recess, and everyone would leave the building. Well, in 1953, there was a session, and they all left the building. And there was a man, his name was Cy Meacham, and he was a custodian, and he was downstairs working. So he was sweeping and mopping and all that. And all of a sudden, Mr. Meacham heard kind of a rustling noise, and he said to himself, "What is that?" And then he realized, well, I'm all by myself. Everyone's left the building. It must be my mind playing tricks. So he kept on working. And then he heard that same rustling noise again. What is that? And then I heard bang, bang, bang. Uh-oh, this is definitely not normal. So he ran up those stairs, and he started to come towards where he heard the noise coming from, the chamber. And as he did, there were 3 teenage boys passing by him, lickety-split. Well, Mr. Meacham was pretty savvy. He realized these kids were probably up to no good. He was going to get to the bottom of it. So he followed the kids down the stairs, but the kids were too fast for Mr. Meacham, and they got away scot-free. Well, as you can imagine, Mr. Meacham's heart is pounding, and he said to himself, I got to kind of relax here. And he did. Finally, he said to himself, I better find out what those kids did. So he walked up those stairs again and came to his chamber, and to his great horror, he saw 3 bullet holes in Old Abe here. There was one right here, one right here, and one right here. Well, what was he going to do? This happened on his watch. He was afraid that he was going to lose his job. So what he did is he took this big porch off the wall, and with his fingers, he very carefully kind of smoothed over those bullet holes. And then he had a piece of cardboard, and he had some glue, and he glued it together, and then he rehung it. The legislature met the next day. Guess what happened?
They noticed?
No one was wiser. Apparently, he had done a pretty good job.
Oh.
So this picture was brought to that new building, the new legislative building, that they discovered the extent of the damage because they had to clean it. And in the process of cleaning it, they found those 3 bullet holes, and there was a 4th hole. We're not exactly sure where that came from. But they repaired it. They did a pretty good job. And if you go into the legislative building and you go to the gallery, it looks perfect.
Oh.
But if you were to go into the chamber itself and look at kind of an angle, you could still see those bullet holes. And that, my friends, is the story of the second shooting of Abraham Lincoln happened right here in Carson.
Did he get to keep his job?
Yes, and he didn't tell us that story until he retired.
Smart. Smart.
What is JJ? He's the one that asked about this.
This is, oh my dear, it comes.
Come on, slow folks. I'll forget them.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
They don't want to know.
Okay, in our history, we've had 3 foreign-born governors, and here are 2 of them. This is Reinhold Sadler. He was born in Prussia, and this is John Jones, and he was born in Wales. As was already mentioned, they're members of the Silver Party. They weren't Republicans, they weren't Democrats, they were members of the Silver Party. You might ask, well, what did they represent? Well, they wanted a bimetallic currency, a currency that was backed by gold and silver. And why do you think they would say silver? We had a lot of silver, so we wanted to market for it. So this party, by the way, was not only here in Nevada, but also in other silver-producing states, like Idaho. They also had a silver party. Next one I want to show you is a man. His name was,
Where was he from again?
Prussia. Prussia is part of Germany now. Prussia.
I thought it said Persian.
This is John Kincaid. Governor Kincaid left office in 1882, but he wasn't out of work for very long. He became the territorial governor of Alaska.
Oh.
He was tired of the heat. When I'm north.
I don't have enough seats for everyone, but
Well, this is the Supreme Court?
Supreme Court.
Wow.
It's a small room. Please take a seat.
So everybody can hear everybody.
I guess so.
Can I sit down so I can get a nice photo, please?
And then when you have a couple, you get to go look inside if you like. You know, whenever I show people this room, I tell them that it's the Supreme Court of the state of Nevada, or was. They say, well, it's a nice room and all, but it's kind of small. Well, I suppose it is. But you have to remember, when we became a state, we only had about 40,000 people in the entire state. And most of the cases that came before the High Court had to deal with mining and mining claims. So this served our purposes for many, many years. And this remained the Supreme Court until 1937, when they moved across the street to where the Attorney General's offices are now. Anyway, this is original to the building. You know, I mentioned that we spent $170,000 to build the Capitol building in 1871, and that did not include the $20,000 that we used for furnishing the building. And this is part of the furnishing. This is made out of pure oak, beautifully carved, as you can see, all the way around. And two men would be hard-pressed to lift this thing. It is so heavy. And it's hard to believe it's over 130 years old. And I attribute the great condition to our custodial staff. They do a wonderful job. The first three members of our Supreme Court are these two gentlemen here, these three men. I kind of like this one because the man that's seated on the left, he has kind of a frown on his face. And I have to give him a little credit. In those days, to be having a picture taken would be very still for a while. It was hard to keep a smile on. The man in the center reminds me of Jeff Davis. They have Confederacy. I mean, he's not, but he kind of reminds me of him. And here's some of the other members that have been in the High Court. As I mentioned, we have three members of the Supreme Court, and we kept that tradition until 1967. And then at that time, we increased it to 5, and we currently have 7. And they have a beautiful building over there. And they do conduct tours occasionally over there, but you have to make reservations for it. At this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about our state seal. This was our state seal. It looks very similar to the seal that we have today, with one major exception. Here we have a quartz mill with the smoke going to the right, and here we have a train on a trestle with the smoke going to the left. Someone saw this and they said, you know, it doesn't make sense. How can you have smoke going to two different directions? And they thought it was a joke perpetrated by Mark Twain because he knew the people that made this. Actually, there's a good reason why the smoke is going to two different directions. And you know what that is?
The wind.
The train is moving. Of course,
Moving north and south.
but despite this logical reasoning, there was a controversy, and they kept on talking about it. Till finally, in 1917, we had a state printer that said, this is silly. I'm going to make the new state seal with all the smoke going in the same direction. He wasn't really authorized to do this, but he did. And then he was followed by the state legislature making it official. So now we have it going in the same direction. Your tax dollars at work. Okay, folks. Now into an area that's like a corridor that connects the Octagon Annex with the main building, and it talks about the contributions of women. This corridor connects the two, and we made this as our most recent historical addition to the building. And it shows the contributions of women. You know, because we were a small state and there's just so many men, a lot of the jobs that were sometimes and usually traditional men, women would do. For example, ranching. We have a lot of people that would fill with ranching. This is kind of interesting. Here we have a lady, her name is Leanne Johnson, and she operates these big, huge ore carts. for a mining. In fact, during the 20s, she made these beautiful baskets, and they became collector's items. Some of them are worth over $1 million for one basket. We at the library, or the museum, have a vault, and we have 20 of them. Oh, wow. They're beautiful. And she's a big woman, and she had large hands, but she could make some of the very tightest of weaves. And also, she changed the shape of her traditional basketry. They were truly a piece of art. I told you about that lady that gave us that nice hand clap. I would not like to, she was, you could tell that she was a teacher, and I would not want to cross her. We were talking about the contributions of women. One of the very first women's athletic groups. They were from UNR. They were a basketball group. And look at the thing that they had to wear. And they actually played, I think it was at Stanford, and they won. Also, to gamble. And sometimes women were kind of reluctant if there was all men. So they thought, well, why don't we get women to be the dealers? And they did, and it worked out perfectly.
Women dealer.
Maud Frazier. And she was a teacher.
I was about to say she looks like a teacher too.
Yeah. And also, one more thing I want to show you before is this desk. This was one of the original legislative desks. And I always like that because it's kind of like an old school,
Old school desk.
But they used to have all in over. Beautiful. Well, folks, I'm now going to take you. As you can tell, because we have these very high ceilings, you need a very efficient way to heat the building. When I first started to give these tours, I looked at this radiator, and I thought, wow, I bet there's two grates there. I thought perhaps they put their mittens in there to keep them warm during the winter time. So I went downstairs and I asked the policeman, I said, is that true? He says, no. He said the real reason was to keep the governor's dinner warm when he was late. And this was actually part of the governor's mansion and later brought here, but we had something very similar to this all over the building. And if you've ever been in a house that has radiated heat, it's wonderful because there's a little bit of humidity. Now, how did they light the building before we had electricity? We had kerosene chandeliers, and they provided light. And we became electrified in 1880s, and of course, then we had electricity. Okay, folks, I'm going to show you a rope. A man who killed Juliette Willette, and she was a, how shall I say it, a lady of the night in Virginia City. And she was well loved in Virginia City. And so they found him, and they hung him. And that's part of the rope that they used.
He killed him, not her.
Sorry?
He killed the lady?
Our oldest governor, Governor Colcord, was 100 years old when he passed. He came originally from California. And the next one I want to show you is kind of interesting. This is Frank Bell, and there's a connection between him and Governor Stevenson. In 1886, he was elected to office in 1887. And with him was a man who was the lieutenant governor, ran with somebody to fill that position. He asked his good friend, Mr. Chubbuck, if he would like the job. He said, sure. But he didn't like the job very well, and he kept it for about 2 months. He resigned. Now he had to hire somebody else. He chose Frank Bell. Good choice, by the way. Frank Bell was very accomplished. He was a telegrapher. And also he was responsible for some of the lines that went across our state for telegraphy. He accepted that position. And he served as lieutenant governor for about 8 months. And then Governor Stevenson became ill. Oh, he became very ill. And he died. He became governor. And so now he's the only person in Nevada history to serve as lieutenant governor and as governor, and was never elected to either of those two positions. He was governor for about 3 months. And then at the end, they asked, would you like to run again? He said, I don't think so. This used to be the old Senate chamber, and we've converted it into a bit of a museum for Nevada history. And as you can see here, we have all 17 counties of Nevada, and the numbers refer to historical places or recreational places or cultural. And this is another map, but more graphic, I guess you'd say. it contains some things that you might associate with the state of Nevada. We have a lot of cattle here in Nevada. So we have a iron, branding iron. We also have a lot of minerals. So there's a geologist's hammer. And of course we have mining. So there's a mining's light. And we have a lot of fossils here. So this is a replica of a camel's bone.
Not dinosaur.
No, this is kidding. Yeah. And this is rather interesting. This is a Thule duck decoy. The original was found to the northeast of Reno, and was found to be about 2,000 years old.
Wow.
Well, we kept it here for a while, and then when they made the new museum for Americans in Washington, D.C., they wanted this there. And before we did, though, we showed the original to a man who was a member of the Paiute Shoshone tribes. And he said, "Can you make a duplicate of this for us?" He said, "I'm sorry." He said, that art has been lost. We don't teach it. But he said, "Give me a couple of days." But through trial and error, he was able to reproduce it and did a wonderful job. I've seen how he does it. It takes him about 2 hours to do.
What is it?
Where's the original?
The duck decoy?
It's a decoy.
Decoy.
The original is in Washington, D.C. And really, this is made of Thule. And if you ever felt Thule is kind of light, it will float. I'm now going to show you what it looks like when it's all decked out. To make the duck decoy even more realistic, they had cut the head of a real duck and they put it on top. And they would take the feathers of a real duck and they put it on the body of the duck decoy. And then they would kind of color it with like burning it. Now you might ask, well, who were the very first people to come to Nevada? And of course, it was the Native Americans. Now the next question is, when did they come to Nevada? And this is a point of contention. There are two viewpoints. One is, if you ask a Native American, they'd say, that's silly. We have always been here. But if you ask an archaeologist, an anthropologist, they would say at least 14,000 years ago. And how do they derive at that? Well, one is because we found a cache of grasshoppers, because they used to eat them. And they analyzed it. And they found out that those grasshoppers were 14,000 years old. And then they looked at some of the art, the rock art above Reno, and they discovered that because of studying the patina, they were able to find out how old that was. Again, 14,000. So we know that people have been here at least 14,000, maybe even before. I'll show you some of the implements they used in the early years. First, we have just a simple spear. So when they first came to Nevada, it's probably all they used. Later, it was supplanted by the atlatl, which is kind of like a throwing stick. And then later, about 1,500 years ago, we had the introduction of the bow and arrow. And this had the advantage of being light, but also you could kind of crouch and then kind of surprise your prey. Now, the first Europeans to see Nevada was a man called Jose Garces. He was a Franciscan, and he was Spanish. And he was trying to find a way between New Mexico and California, because they were both owned by Spain. And he just barely touched Nevada, right around where the Colorado River is. The first American was Jedediah Smith, and he came in 1826, again to southern Nevada. And the first scientific expedition was led by John C. Fremont. We had to have an area to process it. And here we have gold and silver. We have a mint. In 1863, the Congress authorized a branch mint. And we only worked with gold and silver. So here are actually two original trade dollars. These were not to be used in the United States. They were only to be used in the Orient. And they have chalk marks on them. And they have a little bit more silver than a regular silver dollar. Now the largest coin we made was a $20 gold piece. It contained almost 1 ounce of pure gold. We made a $10 and a $5. And this is a dollar coin. And I bet maybe some of you have seen these. I spent them when I was a boy. One time I was working for my dad. He paid me during the summer $200. So I had a big bag of them. And you get like about 5 of these in your pocket. You knew you had money. And they jingle too. Well, folks, I want to thank you for a wonderful trip. I hope you come back again. Please feel free to explore the area whenever you'd like. Thank you.